Hi everyone. So depending on where you're from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope all of you are keeping in good health. Thank you so much for joining FlightWare's webinar on emerging technologies in supply chain. So we'll get started now. Generally known to be a very resilient industry, the supply chain world saw some unprecedented challenges in 2020 owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. Right from an unexpected spike in consumer goods demand to shutting of warehouses due to lockdowns, this industry has seen it all. And this has caused forward thinking supply chain professionals to research, test, and adopt newer technologies that can help their supply chain operations withstand unexpected disruptions and challenges. So, with our webinar, we are excited to discuss these emerging trends in the supply chain domain and how they can add tremendous business value for supply chains. I'm Meecha and I'm part of the business development team at FlightWare. And I have 3 years of experience in the automation industry. And I've worked with SaaS companies that are into marketing automation and now, of course, drone automation. And alongside me, I have my colleague, William Stavanja. So Will is based out of Greensboro, North Carolina, and he's the director of customer success here at FlightBase. Will has a background of 20 years in engineering, technical service management, continuous improvements in operations and logistics, and he's an aerospace engineer. So, a quick introduction of our company. FlightBase is a 4-year-old US-based startup, and we also have an office in India. FlightBase is the world's first IoT platform. So, by IoT, I mean Internet of Drones. So, FlightBase, with its drone agnostic software, enables intelligent automation of drones for a variety of use cases such as security, surveillance, emergency response, delivery, asset inspection, warehouse management, and so on. So the advantage of FlightBase is that now enterprises can leverage our cloud-based applications to operate a fleet of drones with just a 4G, 5G, LTE, or Ethernet connection and scale up their operations with ease. So that's a quick introduction of our company. And with this, I'd hand it over to Will to walk you all through the emerging trends in supply chain industry. Will, over to you.
All right, thank you, Meet. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Good morning, good afternoon. During our time today, we will spend a few minutes here discussing the various emerging technologies that are currently evolving in supply chain. We'll cover some examples of how they are transforming the way how we move goods and services globally nowadays. Likewise, we'll discuss what it takes to properly adopt these technologies today and gain ROI in the near future. And at the end, we'll have an opportunity to open it up for some questions from the audience. Next slide. Sorry, Meet, I may have a little bit of a delay on my end. Can you hear me okay? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so supply chain as we know it, it continues to evolve in order to keep up with the global demand from consumers everywhere, right? So companies are investing in emerging technologies that enables them to make fast decisions while reducing operational costs, primarily in an effort to gain a competitive advantage. Now let's take a look at these technologies and learn how, especially when they're combined, they can transform supply chain as we know it in the near future. Next slide, please. So let's begin with the topic of Internet of Things, or IoT. So we can think of IoT devices as the physical sensors that are used in supply chain. Primarily to gather the necessary data to help supply chain companies make smart decisions. Now, IoT devices are not new. They're not a new technology, and they've been widely adopted already in various industries. Such as retail, healthcare, Now, the benefit of IoT devices to supply chain is the ability to collect data, that is especially data that is necessary for companies to make these smart decisions and improve forecasting and planning long term. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at an example. Here's an example from a company such as Maersk. Now, Maersk, they own ships and they're a global company. Maersk has adopted IoT devices and they have installed them in refrigerated containers. So they move cargo globally across the continents. So now Maersk owns over 300,000 containers worldwide. And inside of those containers, they're transporting goods like fruits, vegetables, for example. Now, it is important that in the transport of these containers, which again, they're traveling globally, they maintain a certain temperature inside of the containers to prevent the loss of those goods. So in order to monitor the conditions of these containers, they install IoT sensors and devices to not only prevent the loss of food inside of these containers, but also help with the tracking of the location of those containers and reduce labor at the docks. Now, let's think about that for just a second. So think of ships that are coming inbound with, say, 100 or more containers, right? And now each of those containers need to be tested, they need to be checked, somebody's got to walk around to actually find them. And that's a lot of time that the ship is now at port. And now the cost of having the ship parked, docked, it's quite high for the company. So in order to keep things moving fast enough, by using IoT devices, they now know exactly which of these refrigerator containers they need to target in an effort to prevent food from spoiling, or maybe other goods being damaged. So no more bad apples for the company as a result of the adoption of IoT sensors. Next slide, please. Our next emerging technology is artificial intelligence. So now that we've used IoT devices to collect the raw data, we can now think of AI as the processing of such information. So like humans, computers can use predictive analytic models that can be taught how to interpret results from the raw data that's been obtained. So today, AI is already playing a role in supply chain, primarily in the form, of visual-based data and reporting. I'll share one example with you guys. Because of COVID-19 this past year, many of our customers have adopted facial recognition temperature scanners. And they're placing them at the entrance of the facilities to prevent people from entering the building that are showing symptoms of the virus and certainly, spreading it inside of their facilities. Now, AI provides supply chain with the ability to make fact-based decisions in a short amount of time and with fewer resources. So automation devices using AI software models can learn over time in a similar manner as humans by continuously evaluating its environment, which is perfect for improving forecasting operations and planning. Next slide, please. So here's another example. In this case, an example of how artificial intelligence is being used in supply chain. Now, here's a company by the name of Lineage. Now, Lineage is using software which is running AI algorithms, and it's tied to their WMS in order to forecast when orders will arrive and leave a warehouse. Now, the AI allows the company to now predict the path of the orders. So what does that mean? That means that now employees, they know which pallets are gonna stay longer in the warehouse And this allows them to place those pallets in deeper locations inside of the warehouse, whereas pallets that are not going to stay in the warehouse as long, they may be placed much closer to the dispatch areas. So by implementing this AI software within their existing platform, Lineage has increased their efficiency by 20% so far. So instead of them having to move panels around without any particular path within the warehouse, the company is now able to make smarter decisions about where to place their pallets and be able to move inventory much faster. Next slide, please. So next, let's talk automation. First of all, like IoT, automation is, especially to supply chain, is not new. Automation has been around for some time. We can think of automation in the form of AGVs, automated ground vehicles, automated pickers, drones, right? So there are various forms of automation. Now, automation gives us, in a way, a physical component to conduct repetitive tasks. And it allows us to reallocate labor onto other areas within the supply chain. Now, the benefit of automation in supply chain is that it gives us some flexibility of how we use our labor force. Now we can increase safety. Granted, there's probably nobody in the area in some cases, and it gives us a certain level of reliability and predictability. So now when we're doing predictive models or we're forecasting and we have a robot doing a repetitive task, we can now safely make some general assumptions that the robot is only going to be down for a certain amount of time, for things like maintenance, for example. And we can also assume that that robot is not going to pack up and go take another job or be out sick. So it gives us some level of predictability in the way how we do forecasting. So automation now gives us an extra layer of operational flexibility within supply chain that we haven't had before. Next slide. So now let's take a look at an example, a brief example here from a company like PepsiCo concerning automation. So a company like PepsiCo has been using truck loaders and automated pickers in order to create customized cases for retail, smaller retail businesses. So as a result of the adoption of the automation, they have gained an increase in retail orders that they would have otherwise not had. Other companies would have, simply gotten the main pallets, that would have broken them up, they would have created their own business of their own, and begin to distribute mixed cases to smaller retailers. And I'm sure that that's already happened. But by adopting automation, PepsiCo can now do these mixed cases in-house and enhance the experience of their smaller retailer customers. So again, they're gaining orders that they didn't have before through the adoption of automation. Next slide. So the final emerging technology is blockchain. We can think of blockchain as an internet-driven technology that decentralizes data. So blockchain brings transparency to the data that is being shared and stored along the supply chain. So financial entities now have adopted a form of blockchain, and we've heard of it, I'm sure. It's cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, right? But the benefit of supply chain the benefit of blockchain within supply chain is the ability to store and report the data with transparency. Long term, our customers will be providing us with something known as a smart contract. Now, what's a smart contract? A smart contract is associated with blockchain, and in the form of tracking specific information within the supply chain. Now, one short example here is from the food industry. So, tracking the maximum temperature, for example, of raw meat from the moment it leaves a co-packer all the way to the moment it's on our dinner plate, it's an important component long term that will be part of our contracts. It then all becomes all about customers receiving a quality product. Things like audit processes will eventually begin to diminish with smart contracts. Why? Because raw data of the sensors in combination with AI will now trigger real-time warnings that can automatically result in a return of a product or a pallet or a cooler, filled with fish, for example, before it even reaches the next link of supply chain or the customer at the end. So this information will allow supply chain in general to reduce administrative costs over time. This is important because it can now transform supply chain as we know it today onto a global supply chain at lower price point. Next slide, please. So let's look at a brief example here. So one example of how blockchain is being used, it's by the airline Lufthansa out of Germany. So Lufthansa has been a champion of blockchain within the aviation industry. In this case, Lufthansa, as the customer of the aircraft and the parts and so on, they're able to now utilize a form of a smart contract which gives them the ability of tracking how maintenance and services are conducted on various components within their aircraft. So from the moment of when the first component comes out of the factory to when sequential services are conducted on these components, landing gear, flaps, you name it, it gives them a certain level of information associated with how often the services are done. It tells them what is the reliability of the product, how long does it last before it needs complete replacement. So by Lufthansa using blockchain, it brings a transparent way of forecasting and predicting how Lufthansa is going to adjust purchase orders, how it will arrange its maintenance schedule. And it gives them a significant amount of information to ensure that they have little to no downtime within their aircraft fleet. Next slide. So, okay, so we've learned about these, we've been exposed to these emerging technologies. So how are companies beginning to adopt these technologies? First of all, it all starts with research, understanding the technology. What is the value that brings to the business, right? But at the same time, understand that from a short-term perspective, it's only going to give you a set amount of information, set amount of a return on the investment. However, long-term, when multiple of these technologies come together, the return on the investment is going to be quite significant. But it all starts with understanding what it is, investing in the technology, testing it out, understanding that these emerging technologies are still developing and they are in their infancy in a way. However, they're already providing return on the investment, and the consumers of the future will demand more information about the product. And those companies in supply chain that can provide a tracking information at a much lower price point, they're certainly going to have that competitive advantage. Now, once you evaluate the benefits of the data for your business and your customers, then optimize the solution, the technology. In other words, bring it in, use it as is, but avoid creating upscope of the technology and preventing the technology from being used as originally intended. You know, as humans, we tend to we see something, we quickly want to adapt it into something, and unfortunately, that creates bottlenecks in our ability to gain value from the technology fast enough. So that 3-month integration schedule or 4-month integration schedule, now it's a year, and that 11-month ROI now turns into 18 months, right? So be careful with upscoping and changing the technology as is. Bring it in, use it, and then optimize it. Use agile project management. Many companies already have adopted this model, and it's a good model specifically for emerging technologies because it gives companies some level of flexibility on how to adopt the product based on its capabilities, while understanding that there will be roadblocks in its integration, not necessarily from its technical feasibilities, but operationally within the business as well. Don't forget to measure results after, when testing and deploying the technology, and bring the technology as is. Don't wait, because again, it could be the difference between having a competitive advantage and not. So where does FlytBase and FlightWare fall within the emerging technologies? Well, it's in two categories: automation and AI. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Meet here, and he can share more information about FlightWare.
Thank you so much, Will, for that walkthrough. So it gives me a pleasure to introduce FlightWare to all of you. So a scalable solution for warehouses and distribution centers to automate their inventory scans and audits. Essentially, FlightWare leverages its intelligent automation to empower reliable off-the-shelf drones to conduct inventory scans in a time and cost-effective manner. Because as the off-the-shelf drones are cost-effective and are becoming increasingly reliable, the inherent value lies in software to perform different use cases. In this case, that would be counting inventory. So FlightWare has the ability to perform wall-to-wall scans and cycle counts with true end-to-end automation. And since the drones are inherently made to fly outdoors with GPS connectivity, FlightWare is developed in a way that drones can fly indoors in a GPS-denied environment with just an Ethernet connection. So essentially, we are a inventory automation software, and we leverage off-the-shelf drones to perform these wall-to-wall scans as well as cycle counts. So of course, it starts with defining your mission. In this case, it would be deciding which locations you want the drones to scan. And on your screen, as you can see, the dashboard is super easy to use. And the warehouse operators can be trained in less than 60 minutes to learn how to use them, because it's just a matter of selecting which locations need to be scanned. Let's say you want to scan 20 pallet locations in aisle B. It's just a matter of visiting the warehouse layout in the center and selecting those locations. That's how easy it is. And this would be the only manual part in the whole flow, because once the warehouse operator schedules a mission, whatever happens will be completely autonomous. So a quick introduction to the workflow of how FlightWare works. On the right side, you can see that the drone takes over a scheduled time once the warehouse operator has scheduled the mission. In the second step, you'll see the drone is scanning all the front-facing barcodes on each pallet location. And on the third step, you'll see the drone will follow a predefined path. So the example which I took, let's say you have selected 20 locations that need to be scanned. The drone will follow a certain pattern to ensure that all the front-facing barcodes of the inventory are scanned. And once that is done, the drone lands back at the charging station. Now, the charging station or the charging pad is something that is developed by us in the sense that warehouse operators don't need to worry about low batteries. The drone can seamlessly navigate back to the charging pad, charge itself, and prepare for the next mission. So that's the mission workflow. And on the fifth step, you'll see that whatever the drone's mission was, whatever the data report is, all of that is available on the dashboard. In the whole workflow, if you can see, there is no manual intervention involved at all, because once the mission is launched, it's just a matter of sitting back and watching the drones do the magic. And reiterating my previous part, where our solution is completely automated, right from taking off from the charging pad, conducting the mission, and of course, returning back to the charging pad and charging itself. And the reason we leverage off-the-shelf drones is because the drones are increasingly becoming reliable and cost-effective. So essentially, we integrate our software with these reliable off-the-shelf drones, and yeah, that provides us with tremendous value. And data security is something which is, of course, very sensitive to a lot of companies. So we ensure that all the data stays on premise, and we only push it to cloud instance if the customer insists. But otherwise, we ensure that all the data of the missions that was stored, it stays with you and not with anyone else. All the operations are centralized because there's a single dashboard that can control all the drones. Let's say in your warehouse you have deployed 10 drones, but all the 10 drones are mapped to our software, where essentially once you launch the mission, the drones will automatically conduct the complete mission, and you just have to watch it from a single dashboard. The operations are not scattered, all of it is centralized. And since WMS integration is, of course, important, we are the WMS agnostic in the sense that as long as we have API access, we can integrate with any WMS or ERP system. And the advantage of it is that you can run a more comparative reporting, and or you can either push the drone data into your WMS, or you can pull the WMS data into the drone dashboard, and of course, compare the reporting. And all the reports that you see, uh, there are multiple image proofs and live video feed, which essentially validates what the mission is or the reporting status is. So that's a quick overview of our solution. And as Will mentioned, the technological adoption roadmap, uh, as it should be with every technology, of course, the first step always comes that you need to ensure that the solution is feasible, whether you require to make a lot of operational changes. If yes, then is it worth spending your time and finances on them? So, of course, feasibility check comes first. And once you confirm the feasibility that this solution can be integrated into your existing operations, the next step is testing the solution in phases or on a limited scale. So, for in the example of drones, you can do a pilot deployment where you can check how it works in few of your pilot locations, and it gives you an idea as to how it will look in your existing operations, how the integration works, whether do you require a lot of configurational changes. That is where pilot deployment comes into picture, where you get to evaluate all these options. And the final step, of course, would be production, where if you're satisfied with the pilot and you would like to go on a full scale deployment, the production deployment comes into picture, where in the example of drones, the drones are completely doing inventory scans instead of humans. So that's what we mean by production or go live stage. And once you go into production, it's just a matter of realizing the ROIs. Yeah, in our case, that generally is less than a year. So that's like a quick risk managed drone adoption, or in fact, it is applicable for every newer technological adoption. And the business value, so apart from the ROIs, the intangible benefits are a lot for warehouses and distribution centers, where there is increased worker productivity and safety. Now your workforce can engage in more productive tasks. And of course, since the drones can scan generally inaccessible locations, the safety of workers is also increased. And of course, you do not need to invest in forklifts, or you deploy more labor. The drones will ensure that you see a payback period of less than a year. And of course, the reporting is not just limited to one or two images. There are multiple image proofs and video feed that is stored on premise, as I mentioned earlier. So that is another benefit you get. And as the technology evolves, of course, there would be newer trends in future. But as the technology evolves, the drones can even work in block stack storage or bulk storage, where they can fly and capture inventory data in that layout. And of course, there's a partial pallet cycle count. So there is a challenge of counting inventory in a partial pallet configuration. But as the technology evolves, it will be possible soon. And since the drones are off-the-shelf drones, they can scan what is in front, that is front-facing barcodes. So in that case, multi-deep storages are a cause of limitation right now. But the compounding benefits of technologies such as inventory drones is that as the drone technology and the software technology evolves, scanning inventory multi-deep storage would happen very easily. So that's a quick overview of the business value drones as well as the other technologies that we'll mention generate for warehouses and distribution centers. Thank you all again and wish you all a good day. Thank you so much.